All right, everybody, welcome to the Whatever Whatever podcast, where we talk all things Armored Core. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about three topics. Going to have Armored Core 6, what happens if it doesn't come. Going to be talking about PPSS netplay and Armored Core 4 concept and where the series went in that. Shoot, this hosting thing is going to be an issue. Anyhow, dry run. Um, and where Armored Core 4 was taken in terms of development and the concept behind it. With me today are From Chang and David Ball.
Hey,
Or
yo.
I guess,
Nope.
yeah, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Now, digging right into things, let's go ahead and get into Armored Core 6. Now, that's kind of a topic that people have been pandering towards these days, but with recent server scares and low server populations, we've been sort of thinking, what happens if we don't get an Armored Core 6? What can the community do? And maybe what can we do to save ourselves in the event that Armored Core Verdict Day is the last Armored Core game we see? And I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay, so this is a topic I think that a lot of us are talking about, especially a lot of the verdict day vets, because it's been, close to 2 to 3 years now where we don't really hear a lot about a new Armored Core game, which is interesting because if you look at the development cycle of Armored Core, there's pretty much been one Armored Core a year since I think like Armored Core Master of Arena. So from that point on up till about Armored Core 4 Answer, there's been one AC game a year. The exceptions being, I think, between Project Phantasma and Master of Arena, and then 4 Answer and 5. So, that's a pretty long period. And the key thing to note here is that From Software hasn't given us any spoilers, teasers, or anything in regards to a new Armored Core. So there's basically been no news about it.
I think the problem with if it doesn't get released is everyone's just going to keep crying about it. I mean, it's one of those things where there's so many different topics coming up about it now, saying where is it, where is it? Obviously, everyone's desperate for it, but I think at least from my perspective, it's one of those things where because I'm not particularly heavy on the multiplayer side of things, I've just been kind of patient. But you can definitely tell the community's just kind of clawing at whatever they can get their hands on desperately.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look anywhere, there's talking about Armored Core. There's always a topic about, hey, is Armored Core 6 around the corner? When's Armored Core 6? Hey, has there been anything about Armored Core 6? It's like you literally cannot get away from the topic no matter where you go. Skype, Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, it's pretty much everywhere.
Right, and I think a lot of the clamor for Armored Core 6 comes from, okay, we've had Dark Souls 2, we've had Bloodborne, we have a bunch of DLC for both. Dark Souls 3 has been proposed. Guys, what's happened to Armored Core?
I think, all right, so I've done quite a lot of research into this. Um, Armored Core, since it's been on the next gen, hasn't been doing fairly great sales wise. I think the only exception is probably Armored Core 5, but even when you compare the sales numbers, it hasn't done as well as Dark Souls. So you're talking about a game that's probably just as intensive to make, but with significantly less profit. So if you think about it, with From Software, with their success with Dark Souls, they're kind of weighing the pros and cons. Like, is it worth it to make the Armored Core games anymore? Because next gen in general, if you look at it as a whole, has not been doing too well, and so they have to think about whether it's time to do another reboot or it's time to put the game on the shelf with everything else with older games like Tenchu or Kingsfield. And I do think it's a very real reality that we potentially have to accept because, on one hand, yes, Armored Core certainly has had a lot of longevity, but on the other hand, it's also a series that's been chock full of problems, which you can kind of see whenever you look at the sales or reviews of the game.
In light of the difficulties that may see in developing a direction for Armored Core 6, or at least the devs will, what can we do as a community if we don't see AC6 anytime soon, or even at all?
Well, I think that's one thing that's clear, and it's something that pretty much most of the people who've really been at the forefront of the community have been doing is that we really need to be active and get our shit together because right now we're pretty spread out over a large area. international. When you think of the AC community, we're kind of thinking internationally, so not just America, but everywhere else. Because one thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of AC fans who are, in different parts of the world. So places like Germany, there's a huge number in the Southeast Asia area. There's also quite a few in the Middle East. And, we're really just spread out all over the place. And the only thing really connecting us is the fact that we're really into AC. Unfortunately, it hasn't really helped us because we're not really working together. So, we have all these people. We know where some of them are. We don't know where some of them are. And, we're just not working together. If you look at the events that have been run for the past decade now, they pale in comparison to what was done, when Armored Core 3 was around. Sometimes we have an event maybe once a month if we're lucky, but most of the times there's 3 or 4 months when there's nothing happening and people aren't really talking. And we, in that sense, we really do need to start organizing and finding ways to get people to keep playing the game without, you know, without going at each other's throats, because that's the other problem too, that people are not getting along. And I think you guys have seen this, a lot before, especially like David. We've seen this a lot in the Facebook group.
Yeah, in the Facebook group, it tends to be, well, the majority tends to be foreign FA fans versus V and Verdict Day fans, because it's either, AC5 and Verdict Day is slow, or, FA is too fast, and all everyone does is Blade. It's kind of that constant deadlock of the community having a go at each other. And then you kind of have the older generations in the background just saying, well, I liked 3 and everything below it, or I liked Last Raven and then I kind of got turned off after it got to 5. And it just tends to be one of those things where 5 was more or less the big focus for everyone, where it was like, oh, okay, if I don't like the designs or I don't like certain things, then this is just going to throw me off. Because when I looked around a couple of nights ago, I did start to see this pattern where everyone got to 5 and was like, oh, okay, it's the next big thing. This is going to be cool. We'll transition. And then they got put off, by either certain gameplay mechanics or just the designs and the pacing. It was a bit weird to see.
Saj, we've been on the forums before, being the 5th gen people. You've seen firsthand kind of just how bad it can get when people are at each other's throats.
It's vicious. Yeah, that's the thing, is that like whenever you mention organizing as community, um, people just seem to shy away from that. They're like, "Oh, I mean, yeah, sure, that's a great idea, but not for me, right?" They'll be all in favor of, getting new members and having some training sessions and getting people to stick around and play the game. But when it comes to pitching in their own effort or working with others, it's off the table.
Yeah, it's like we have this pretty big problem as a community where we can talk the talk, but we can't walk the walk. Like we'll say, oh, this is a good idea, or we should do this, but no one really does anything. Because back on the forums, I want to say about a year and a half ago, there were frequently posts about, hey, we should be active and get the community to do this and that. But at the same time, those same people, they tend not to really do a whole lot. And this is not really meant to put them on blast. This is I just want to point out that we have to be more organized and more structured in order to get stuff done. We can say disdain about things about the community, about people we don't like, or whether it be rule sets, whether it be how people play, or even, dealing with certain people who may have bad behavior or perceived, to be assholes. But some degree or another, whether you like each other or not, you really have to hunker down and figure out how to make it work, because being a small community, this is what we've got. There's not really anything else we can do about it. The game's been out for Verdict Day's been out for almost 2 years now, Sash. Am I right?
Goodness, 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 3 years.
We're coming on 2.5, aren't we?
Yeah, we're pretty much. But at this point, the people you see now are kind of the people you're going to be working with. Majority of them being vets, and maybe some newcomers who come every now and then. So you really have to figure out how to cooperate in a way where it benefits everyone. You can't really just be one team and say, oh, we're the best, or, oh, we do the most, and expect that to mean something. Because no one cares. Once the community's dead, none of that matters. Who's number one? Who's done the most? That's all irrelevant.
I think that's a very good point. And maybe building on that really quick, a lot of the issue seems to be in, as you say, organizing into like a collective, into, getting a population that we can do things with and, work around and maybe at least produce content, really. Um, I haven't really been active recently in like the whole Facebook community and such, but something that I think we need to do as a community is figure out our own interests and push for those and get people content that they're interested in and use that to attract more people. And that seems to be something that's at least what I've seen in my experience trying to do YouTube stuff is that Armored Core fans, while we are kind of few and far between, we do have a pretty decent population out there that is untapped that we don't really see in PvP online that could probably appreciate a lot more Armored Core content. But the issue is getting content to the people that play the game or that are interested in it, and then I guess pulling those people and figuring out what the hell they want to see. And if we don't have an Armored Core 6 coming anytime soon, then I think our biggest objective needs to be figuring out how we can maximize the enjoyment that we get out of the content that we have at hand.
Now, see, this topic actually came up a few times at the very start of Verdict Day. It was Tierson from ACL, since we're both part of the same, we're both staff. And the biggest thing that he talked about was the concept of the silent majority, where most of the people who play Armored Core, who are interested in Armored Core, they don't really speak up. They usually just play the game and never look at the forums, or even if they do, they just stalk it. They don't ever get an encounter or anything. And one thing we really need to do is, like you were saying, is that we need to get them. We need to get their attention and to get them into the scene, because they make up a vast majority of the community, I would say.
Say we're in like a multi-story apartment building, and we can fill every room, but and say we're having like a tournament downstairs in the lobby or something.
Mm-hmm.
Every room is full, but nobody wants to come out of the room. That's basically our community.
Yeah, pretty much. And the worst part about it is that it's incredibly damaging to us, because the more you get into that mindset, not only do you not have cooperation between the people, but there's less encouragement for new players or even some of the vets to stick around.
Yeah, I'd say between that and the sort of drama and the animosity that gets spawned as a cause of that, it really becomes, I guess, disheartening for those that want to sort of try to do something. Like, I know I can pick up a couple players off the top of my head that are, that they've tried in the past to get something going, and being met with setback after setback, even though, maybe the execution wasn't the best, is, it's not fun. You don't want to try after that.
Yeah, and it's
especially when you get met with, with like shit for for just trying to do something for the game that you love.
Yeah, and it's like we even see that in the Facebook group, because I think, David, we've seen a few times where people have made the post asking, just innocent questions like, why do people like Verdict Day, or, hey, can you rate my build? And then they just get turned off by other people just, trashing them for it.
Well, from my side of things, like, first looking at the community, we did do something for a while which wasn't kept up because we kind of ran out of ideas fast. But I started implementing this thing where we were basically doing almost weekly, or it got to the point where it was almost daily challenges, where we just kind of set the community some little thing where it'd be like, okay, see how fast you can complete this level, or see if you can avoid this boss for so long. And it was pretty neat because everyone started getting engaged, and that made me look at it and kind of think, well, okay, there's a lot of hope here and potential for this kind of thing to take off. But like I said, it was one of those things where you have to be really creative with those kind of things, because you can't really just constantly pump out speedrun challenges or, boss evasion challenges. You've got to really put thought behind what you want the community to do. We see a lot of paint job stuff as well, where people just post, like paint jobs and things. And I suppose in hindsight, you could always kind of do contests based on that kind of stuff. I mean, the only recent thing that I keep referencing all the time is how successful Lily Cup was as a community event because that drew in one hell of a crowd, and that has been like the most active anyone's been in ages, and that was really nice to see because almost everyone took some sort of active part in it. There were a lot of people who didn't even like AC that viewed it as well, because I know a load of people that didn't have any interest in AC until I started harping on about it and sending out links to everyone, and then next minute they were like, "Oh, this looks kind of cool. I'll get interested." From a more personal level, I've been in this kind of situation before with a previous community. The Halo PC community, I used to be a really big part of doing modding and stuff, and it used to go through this phase of everyone would constantly be saying, "Oh God, it's dead," and then somebody would create new content, and suddenly, like 100 or 200 people had come back to it. And when this community is running on like 500 people, 200 people is like a really big deal
Hmm.
because it wasn't a big community for the modding at least. It was like you'd have a couple of thousand people playing maybe Blood Gulch over and over again, which is this kind of canyon map with two bases at either end for anyone who doesn't know Halo. And then in the custom edition, you'd have all these crazy levels that were basically made by fans that were like giant open cities and landscapes that were like bigger than anything the official developers had made. And you'd get like maybe three people trying to snipe each other across this map that was like 16 kilometers long. But the point I'm trying to make with that is every time someone made content, people came back. So it's the whole thing of getting people to engage in making that content. Because like we've done this comparison before, where we've said, well, the Eastern or the Asian community makes a lot of like fan art and music videos and everything else, and that always gets eaten up by everyone else. It's like, oh my god, this looks amazing, but when it comes to everyone else in the community, okay, I'll let everyone else do the work, but then I'll enjoy it and not put anything back in. So with people not putting back into the community, that's where it's really suffering because if you were putting that content back in, I reckon the longevity of it could increase because I mean the Halo community, I keep lurking it now and it's still going for the PC version. It's barely there and it's hanging in, but it's been like that for ages, and I don't want to see that happen with the AC community, considering the AC community's been around for probably about 3 times as long.
Yeah, and I think David just hits on the point of we really need to be self-sufficient. We have to figure out ways to make this work, by making content or running events because otherwise things are going to go down the drain really fast. When you are part of a community and game that has 1 million people playing, you can afford to do nothing. But when you have maybe a couple hundred people at best, that's a great way to just run yourself into the ground and have nothing.
2 points I want to make really quick is one, reception of the content that we do put out. How do we articulate that in such a way that it's going to be received well here, internationally, I guess? Because, okay, we eat up these MADs and whatnot and these AMVs, whatever from Japan, and they're freaking delicious and we love them. And I'd argue that maybe we don't have the skill set to reproduce some of these. And as much as we like consuming them, I don't think there's a willingness to put out content because we're unsure of its reception. One, unsure of how to get it to viewers, and two, unsure of whether people will like it or not. And then secondly, crap, I think I just forgot this one on the fly. But crap, yeah, no. Go ahead on that one, and I'll see if I can remember this.
Yeah, so I would say, well, here's the thing. So let's use an example. So let's say you want to build desks or tables. What's the best way to build a desk or a table?
There's multiple ways.
Yeah, there's multiple ways. I
Well,
suppose with materials.
well, see, that's a trick question. The best way to build a desk or a table is to build a desk or a table. It's not reading a book about a desk or a table.
Okay.
It's not, uh, you it's not really building a chair or a stool. It's building a desk and a table. You have to go out and do it. So one of the things I like to tell people is that when you're making stuff, just make it. It's
Just
not
make
going
it.
to be the best the first time around, and you're obviously going to need a lot of polish, but the key thing is that you do it. You have to keep working on it. So let's say you do an AMV and it's not too good. Okay, work on a few more, and you'll see just as you go on, as you put in more effort and as you gain, more experience doing it, it just becomes better and better. The key point though is that you have to start doing it. You
Right.
can't, if you read 10 tutorials and decide by the end of it, oh, your work's not going to be good enough, that doesn't help, because even though you've seen those tutorials, you're not using your skills to do anything. So, you're basically at square one. And if you don't ever do it, then the content's never going to be out there. No one's going to see it. No one's going to view it because it doesn't exist. So you're not going to get feedback to know what you're doing wrong. And so you kind of just get this vicious cycle of, as a result of doing nothing, you end up nowhere. Then the community gets nothing, and basically nothing happens.
Right. It's kind of a self-defeating cycle. I remember my other point that I wanted to make is, um, among, I guess, players and consumers of content, there's a lot of sentiment that it's too late. It's already too late. There's no point in putting out anything. Everything's already dead. Sort of like the Halo folks crying. The community is dead. It's over. There's nothing left we can do. Is there anything we can do to combat that mentality?
Yeah, the thing that the Halo community had was they started getting a really personal relationship with each other, not like on a weird level, but this was kind of like the smaller you have a community, the more you get to know each other, just by chatting. And it did get to the point where everyone was, in chat rooms and constantly on about, everything else apart from Halo. It's just like, oh, how's your day doing? So there was some kind of like growth there on a personal level. But it's one of those things. I think it really is just looking at everything positively instead of being like, oh God, it's the end of the world. Because, I mean, like, for instance, an even smaller community, this was going to be brought up as a joke subject, but Metal Wolf, another FromSoft title, that community is way smaller than the AC community. It's way less known, and that's getting way more attention at the moment. It's like it didn't have hardly any attention up until I think it was two best friends put up the video for it. And I think it
Oh,
was about
right, yeah.
2012. But that's taken off like crazy now, and I think it's just everyone's thinking about the short term and being like, "Oh God, it's going to die," and then I'm not going to be able to enjoy it ever again. But it's not to say that like if we just keep everything going at a nice steady pace or keep creating content, that people won't come in future and be like, "Oh, this is great," I'll get into this because this kind of dives off a little bit, and I won't go too much into it. But like with the stuff that I'm currently doing, trying to make content, and it's like this entire drought of content, more or less, is why I can make stupidly bold claims like, "Oh, this is going to be the only time anyone's ever going to attempt this in the community," because to me it feels like nobody else is bothering. So, to say something like that, who's going to prove me wrong? No
Right.
one, if they're not going to do it. Where it's kind of like my challenge to the community of saying, well, come on, if I can make a bold claim like this and it sounds totally ridiculous, but you think you can do better, then start creating content. Prove me wrong.
You
Fair
know,
point.
anytime people say that the community is dead and that there's nothing we can do about it, I kind of want to punch them in the face.
Yeah, that defeatist attitude just it
Well,
runs rampant.
see, if you look at the history of Armored Core, and you just, look at all the various variables and elements that have played a part in the game and its community, you'll see that Armored Core has a history of a very strong, community force to it, which has allowed it to survive for so long. Because if you think about it, for all intents and purposes, there should be no way that we have all 15 Armored Core games over here internationally. After Armored Core, I think Silent Line, the series hasn't been selling tremendously well, but somehow or another, you have all those games over here. And I think it speaks a lot to, just the testament of what the community can do. And to say that we can't do that, 10 years later, when we do, for the most part, have all the tools that the old community didn't, it comes off as ridiculous to me. It's like, I firmly believe that as long as the servers are still up, there's still a very good chance that we could, do something pretty good with Verdict Day. We just have to really put in that effort and the time to get people to come out and do things. But the key point here is that it cannot fall on the backs of one or two people. You need a lot of the other folks who haven't traditionally been doing stuff to just come out and help as well. Because I used to run a lot of events back then, and if there's one thing I can tell you is that I never got enough referees. At most I think I had 3 or 4, and occasionally some of them would drop out, so I would have maybe 1 or 2, if I'm lucky, when it was time for the tournament to take place. And it's part of the reason why they took so long to run. And so instead of being like a 5 or 6 hour tournament, if I had 6 or 7 people helping me, it's a 12, 13 hour tournament. And that's incredibly draining. And when you don't have the support of other people, you kind of question whether you want to keep doing that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've lost so many people who used to be willing to help, is that they just got burned out. They didn't want to do it all by themselves anymore.
Yeah, because if it's only a few people, then it's kind of strenuous on those few people, and people can't just kind of expect for the same people to keep doing stuff. It's like, it's awkward to say, but community members that are here now and creating content, like say 5 or so years in the future, may not be still here. So it's a bit nasty to kind of rely on the same people to be like, come on, we're encouraging you. It's like the community has to sustain itself by actively getting more involved, by being passionate about it. Because that's one thing. If anything, it seems like everyone is passionate, but they're really silent about it. And I know devs and everything else in companies look towards, how passionate their fans are before putting out games. And I think in terms of the community's strength, it's a testament to the community, and it shows how strong we are at the moment. That, like we said, we've got all of the 15 games in the West at the moment. Whereas if it wasn't that strong, we probably would have seen it end at Silent Line. It's just a case of putting out the content, being more vocal, saying, look, even if you don't create another game, we're still here, we're still enjoying this thing, and it's still as good as we remember it. So that's not gonna stop anyone, from enjoying it. Because I mean, like when I play AC, most of the time, it's offline, so I'm not part of the online community as such. I've only played it a couple of times online, and I got absolutely wrecked. But I still enjoy the older games, playing them offline, playing them versus friends on a couch. And whenever someone comes around who doesn't know what it is, and I'm like, oh, do you want to play a really cool game? And they're like, well, okay, what game? And I mention AC, they're like, I've never heard about this before. What is it? And then I can harp on for hours about how awesome it is and its long history and everything. And you can see, I'm really passionate about it. And people are like, dude, this sounds awesome. Put me on. And then like 5 or 6 matches later, they're like, okay, I think you win, But it's that kind of mentality of, it doesn't always have to be, about the online games. It's just about proving that, this can still go on by how passionate you are and by how engaging you are with everyone else. It's got to be kept together by the relationship that everyone has and how strong that is as a community.
I think passion is a very special role to play in this. Anyhow, that's
I
been
think
about 30 minutes. Do you feel like we want to move on to the next topic?
I just want to make a quick note. I think silent passion is an oxymoron. It's one or the other, folks.
One or
But
the
yeah,
other.
let's move on.
That's right. All right, so now onto the the PPSPP NetPlay emulator. And I don't know a whole lot about this. Chang, would you fill me in?
Yeah, so basically PPSSPP is an emulator, and basically what it does is it emulates the PSP. Particularly for us, the relevant part is that it allows us to play the portable AC games. So that's Armored Core 3, Armored Core Silent Line, and Armored Core Last Raven. I believe we can do Formula Front, but we're not sure yet, because that sits in a bit of a different situation due to its publishing and development was a bit weird. But basically, the 3 games I said right off the bat, those are the ones we can play. The best part about NetPlay, though, is that it actually lets you play online too. So, kind of in a similar vein to Xlink Kai, but it's more reliable. And also, because it's a PSP emulator, it has lower graphical, settings, which basically means even if you have a crap laptop, there's a pretty good chance you can still run, the emulator and play NetPlay.
That
It's
sounds fabulous for a guy like me with a wooden laptop. Now, if I could cut you off there, why should I get interested in this?
Well, if you look at a lot of the talk of the community over the years, one of the big things they tend to be picky about or complain about is remake, HD remake, and particularly when they say that they're talking about they want the older games online, because if you look back, the AC3 to about AC Silent Line are considered to be kind of the golden age of Armored Core, and unfortunately those games are for the most part, they are all land based, so you have to be in person to actually do the stuff. There is a way to do it online with Xlink Kai, but like I said before, it's not too reliable. But basically, that divide has prevented a lot of people from enjoying the old games. And what PPSSPP, the emulator, does is not only can you get to enjoy those games, but what it also lets you do is that you can now play against other people online as well. So you pretty much get the whole Armored Core experience, save for some lag.
It sounds pretty entertaining.
The best part about it is that we've already prepared all the stuff for it. So if you're on the Facebook Armored Core group, we actually do have the emulator all ready to go. It has all the save data for the games 100% completed. The it has all the settings ready to go. So as long as you have the ISOs and you set up the driver for the controller to work, you pretty much can start playing almost immediately.
That's kind of impressive. The wonders of modern technology, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Well, when thinking about getting the community active, it was one of those whole things of why wouldn't you play this? If you're one of those people that constantly goes on about the golden years of AC and uh, don't like, the older games because of whatever reason, I really don't see, why you wouldn't at least try this out and see how good it is, because it's one of those opportunities where if you just kind of let it pass, then you might be missing out on something that you'd otherwise really enjoy, especially considering we put so much thought into making it easily accessible to the point of being like, okay, you just click a few buttons and you're ready. Uh, for anyone like that, no matter how lazy you are, it's like, come on, you can easily do this.
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason not to, because like I said before, if you're interested in Armored Core, this is this is pretty much the easiest and fastest way to go about it without having to spend money on either buying a PS2 or the older games, which can be a bit harder to find. It's with the way it's been done so far, it's pretty much just plug and play. So really, if you can't do that, what are you doing with your life?
It's one of those things of being contradictory, isn't it? If you like AC and you're complaining about, the newer games that much that you're saying, well, oh, I want the old ones, and then you're given the option of playing the old ones for free. You don't have to buy anything, not like a PSP, not a Vita. You don't have to buy a PS2. You don't have to buy any of the games. It's all easily accessible right there. If you have any problems, which should be none, it's like there are people to talk to. There's a very small minority at the moment that have jumped on this bandwagon, but people are getting ready to be engaged and to play against other people. It's just like I really don't see anyone not passing up a chance to play AC for free.
I just want to point out real quick, while David did mention you pretty much don't have to buy anything to play the emulator. Uh, if you do have the ability, do please try to purchase the PSP versions of the games, as they do work with
Yeah.
the emulator. We don't support pirating, and with the series as small as Armored Core, every little bit helps.
Oh, definitely. That was one of the things that I forgot. Obviously, you don't want to condone piracy or anything, but I think it's just because I'm really passionate about trying to get the community active again, and I just didn't think in terms of just being like, well, okay, just get online, give it a shot, seriously.
Well, there you have it. I'll have to give it a shot soon sometime. Oh, now, here's the question. Do you need a controller to play this?
You don't, but considering that this is one of the older Armored Core games, you probably should. Because I've tried using the keyboard. No go.
No go.
Don't try it.
Gotcha.
That's the way the controls it's set by default. You would need 4 hands to control the AC.
That's impressive.
Yes. Unfortunately, I'm Asian and I only have 2, so
Well, there you
It's
have it.
almost like the spiritual successor to Steel Battalion.
yep.
All right, next up we have Armored Core 4 concept. Now, were we going to talk about specifically AC designs or just the change of direction that occurred from, I guess, the 3rd gen to 4th gen?
Mainly
Uh,
the change, kind of just the gameplay mechanics and how everything changed from 3rd to 4th gen.
Well, I have no experience in 3rd gen, so if you could give me a quick rundown of that, and we could maybe discuss, what all changed from 3rd to 4th with a starting point like that.
David?
well, I was going to come at this from a different angle, from the whole thing of comparing the E3 concept ideas to what we actually got. But the differences between the 3rd gen and 4th gen currently, you got a load of different new mechanics, including quick boost. You got a lot larger levels, and obviously graphic
Wait,
fidelity
so there's games without quick boost? I have to interrupt you
I
there.
know.
What?
Most newer fans, especially when they come in at 4 and FA, immediately as soon as you say, yeah, there's no quick boost, they're like, wait a minute, I can't go fast? What is this?
What
Gotta
does
go
it
faster,
mean?
faster, faster.
Uh, it's one of those things you can get kind of this artificial quick boost, but it's done using extension parts, if I remember rightly. Um, the 4, or at least 4 answer had co-op, which was a completely new thing. But I mean, in terms of where I was going to come in from, it's evident that the development for 4 changed primarily because you see that E3 video that they first used, and when you look at it, everyone always brings up the whole topic of, well, why are the crest basic tutorial ACs in the beginning intro or the E3 video for it, and I really think it's primarily because they were thinking of going on this whole idea of we'll try and tie it into the older generation of games, and then at the very last minute they kind of completely deviated and just set it in a new universe, and that's why we got a complete reboot.
Yeah, just to add on to that, before it was called Armored Core 4, it was known as Project Force, and they
Yeah.
actually canceled that game. And then
Oh, shoot.
and so what was left of that became Armored Core 4, which is also kind of why you don't see the older Gen ACs and the new Armored Core 4 stuff. They phased it out basically.
So it's a complete reboot then.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, do you think they'd base that on the switch from, I guess, past gen to the the then current gen of 360 and PS3?
I would say the reason they did that, the primary reason, is that kind of similar to what happened with AC5. They toyed with the initial concept of the game and they just found it didn't work. So they rebuilt it from the ground up to make it what it is now. Because if you look at the trailer, in some respects, it's very similar to what you had in the older games. But then when you compare Project Force trailer to Armored Core 4 as we know it, there's quite a bit of difference in not only how movement kind of looks, but also how weaponry works and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, especially though for everyone that's watched the E3 video, because I know practically everyone who watched that was like, "Oh my god, this is going to be amazing." The most significant change is the how powerful those back lasers are. I think it might be just a trailer feature to get everyone hyped, but Jesus Christ, that was overpowered.
Oh, that's the one with the noblesse oblige just going through tearing
Yep.
people up. Yeah.
Yeah, that was basically look at how awesome this is, and then next minute blowing all the old ACs away, and it's like, well, okay, that may be symbolic of just, yeah, we're doing a complete reboot. This is a new thing that's a lot better than the older stuff. But when they kind of include those old ACs, which probably those files are still in the disk, you'd have to like data mine it to find out. It's really interesting looking at it and thinking, well, what would happen if they did decide to, merge those two universes together? Because we kind of got something similar with Verdict Day, where they brought Four Answer in, because you have the last boss and Spirit and Motherwill and everything. Yeah. So it's probably a concept that they brought back because they were just like, well, okay, we'll bring something in like that because we thought about it, so we'll try re-implementing it.
Interesting. Now, what do you think made the developers make that decision?
It might have been the whole concept of speed, to be honest, because that seems to be the main thing for at least with Four and Four Answer, where they were just like, we want to emphasize at least a little bit more quicker gameplay, and with the energy shielding as well, the PA
Oh,
shielding.
Primal Armor, yeah.
Obviously, those two new mechanics completely obliterate the older generation ACs, because that's why they tend to reference anything as nexts in the newer universe, and that kind of AC is left essentially useless compared to the stuff that you get to pilot normally.
Yeah.
I think
It's kind of like comparing in older generations. It's like comparing one of the end game bosses to either an MT or one of the units that you start off with. Like a tutorial level AC.
I think part of the reason too is that there was kind of a shift in the sentiment of the community as to what Armored Core should be, because think about some of the complaints we have about the older gens. They're very slow, turning's very difficult, and heat is very intrusive and very much a giant pain in the butt to deal with, despite being an amazing mechanic. And I think that's kind of the reason why you see that shift. And you also see it just the shift from the Project Force and Armored Core 4. Because just think of the name: Project Force, firepower, heavy guns, which is kind of what we see in the E3 trailer. But then as you
Yeah,
move on to Armored Core 4, you see that transition away and more kind of to the speed element of it. You're faster, you don't hit as hard, but you can quick boost a hell of a lot. And I think that's kind of the direction they just kept pushing for as the concept kept moving along. A simplified game where it's all about intense fighting.
Yeah, longer gunfights, instantaneous movement, sort of the characteristics of fourth gen in general, would you say?
I'm not sure
yeah.
about longer gunfights. I would say it's shorter, but it's a matter of perspective, I guess.
Could be.
It's also one of those things, especially with the overpoweredness of that trailer for Project Force. That might be another concept that they brought in for the extra weapons, for Five and Verdict Day, the crazy ones like the Giga Cannon and stuff.
All right.
Because those are definitely way overpowered in terms of gameplay and everything. I know not many people use them competitively, but um, it's definitely one of those things where I don't expect a company to just kind of leave an idea on the shelf if they think it's going to be something that might make them a little bit of money or make it more interesting. Because those were definitely one of the main things for Five, including the transformable parts, which I don't think we actually got in the end.
We actually partly we've gotten it with the weapons on, but we haven't really gotten anything that's like Transformer level or Nine Ball Seraph.
Yeah, because I remember in Five, that's the one thing that everyone hyped up about Five when you saw the whole trailer where the head kind of splits apart and does that kind of raw thing where it was like, wait a minute, we're getting transformable parts. It's just like, huh. Especially in the concept art, it shows similar stuff where, you've got all these little bits of panel or armor, kind of popping open and showing like all this exposed mechanics underneath that are superheated. It looked crazy.
Getting ourselves back on track to fourth gen. What do you think made the jump in the art style as well?
I was going to say it might have been something to do with Kawamori just wanting to do something new because he always tends to change his style from each project.
Uh, this may be wrong, but I think the part of the reason is that uh, the last project that Kawamari worked on like full time, so not counting the Four Answer White Glint, the last game was Last Raven, and part of the reason for the change in design is that Four was done by a completely different artist. Not 100% sure about that though.
I see.
Also, when you think about it in terms of rebooting the series, it's like, okay, we'll get a completely fresh look on it. It kind of makes it its own thing rather than kind of keeping it along the same style and then it being related or, kept in the same vein as the older games where you can easily turn around and say, well, oh look, that's related to this universe because it's the same style. Instead, it's like, oh no, this is a completely different and separate thing.
Actually, speaking on that note, in what way did the storytelling change from third gen to fourth?
I would say in terms of just how characters are presented and how they try to give you bits of the story, it's a lot more direct because in older games you would basically have to figure it out from the mail system in the older games, where basically they would send you, various companies would send you emails or even other ravens, and they would basically give you little tidbits of information, not only on the situation, but also various important points in the story, such as the concept of human plus, or, sometimes they give an indication of what happens when you take a mission with them. Because for instance, there's one mission in I believe Armored Core 3. If you read the arena description of this Raven, it tells you that she doesn't like doing missions alone. She always has a partner. And what happens is if you go on a mission with her and you shoot her, she'll turn on you. So in the in in comparison with like Armored Core 4, a lot of this stuff is I would say it's missing. I wouldn't Yeah, it's missing because now you only have the very, very short descriptions of missions and maybe some communication in games to kind of give you an idea of the story. But most of it is very direct because there are cutscenes which tend to talk about, the various elements of the story, such as certain characters, some antagonists, and some of the roles that some of the other companies play. It's even more prevalent in For Answer because, like, and this is, I think, where what fourth gen does pretty well is that the story is pretty straightforward. You can put together most of the pieces of the puzzle if you play through it like 2 or 3 times. Unfortunately, I don't want to give any examples because there are some people who probably haven't played it yet, so spoilers.
There you have it. Yeah.
I'd be half tempted to say that the older generations have a more kind of subtle or hidden storyline to everything because, like we've said, the the fourth gen and up seems to be kind of more obvious, not for the sake of holding your hand, but just that you know what's going on. Because I mean, from personal experience, it takes more than just a couple of playthroughs to figure everything out about the original AC universe because you're not really given too much to go on, and piecing things together is hard, really hard.
Do you think that's kind of a turnoff for newer players?
I, to be honest, I'd say probably yeah, because I remember when I used to play it as a kid, I used to just think, oh, it's a robot game. It's I know the basic story, which is just it's the end of the world. I go kill things, but I never really dived too much into it until I went back to it in about 2009, and I just thought, I'll try and find out everything properly. So I was just diving into it, constantly trying to find little bits and going on various websites that have got other things translated from Japanese, and you find so much more about it by diving in and finding stuff out. But it's people aren't gonna, well, too many people aren't gonna put in the effort. It's like the whole as a reference point. It's like the whole thing with Bungie and Destiny when that came out. Everyone's like, well, where's the story? And they're like, well, you just go on our website when you've found these certain items and you can find the story through those. And it's like, I don't know whether that's like a completely major flaw or whether the designers have just said, well, this is a different way and a more interesting way, or at least we think it is, of telling the story. We're not going to hold your hand for it. Go and explore and find out for yourself what this universe is about.
Yeah, it certainly is a different way of doing it. Now,
Mm.
what do you think fourth gen did well in the transition?
In terms of storyline, I think it literally is just the whole, for basic stuff anyway, it's just being able to actually follow the story a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I just, because four and four answer is literally just here's three factions. It's the end of the world. They're fighting against each other. Survive, you know,
One
Sort of
at
just
its
throwing
most
in the
basic
mix of it.
level.
One thing I
Yeah.
did like just from the gameplay perspective is that they introduced the normal and the hard missions. So basically, it's exactly how it sounds. One mission is the normal difficulty, and the other one is basically a ramped up version where maybe you have to fight another extra AC or another extra enemy. And I think this kind of separation in gameplay was good because it helped a lot of the newcomers, just go through the steps of the regular missions, which aren't very hard because most of them can be done in about a minute or two, or even less than that. So that kind of prepares them to get them to figure out how to play the game without being it too hard, and then that means they can also transition to hard mode where they can, just get better and make the game more challenging for them, basically.
My personal gripe about AC4 was that you couldn't just play it on hard mode, because I know hard mode has a lot more exposition to it as well. Like your operator Fiona will tell you about the AC that's coming to get you or whatever.
I don't know if it's necessarily extra exposition, but it's just different because some of the lines have changed. Like there's one mission where you have to defend Anatolia. What she says, if you go on easy mode versus the hard mode, the text is different, and it also gives kind of a different spin on the relationship between the Anatolia Raven and the operator. I'm not
Ah,
I'm not really sure which one is canon though. Is the hard mode canon in Armored Core 4?
I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I'd have to look that up properly.
Okay.
I feel like we take it to be slightly more canon because it would account for the lack of some of these linkses in for answer. Would you think?
Yeah, because like for instance, if you play the hard mode of the last mission in the game, there's an extra extra next that appears, which kind of ties into the story and explains to you why the events kind of happened the way it did.
Oh, that's right. I would name drop, but spoilers.
Yeah.
Right then. So you spoke of a little bit of gameplay. What do you think? I mean, we've sort of gone over the changes, but what did fourth gen do right in terms of gameplay elements?
I'm not gonna lie. I'm not the biggest fan of fourth gen, as I've kind of said before. So I don't have a lot to say in that regards. The only thing I would note is that it did kind of simplify gameplay a lot by removing the heat element, which was, like I said before, a giant pain in the butt. And that's probably what I think that's the biggest improvement to the
Yeah,
series.
because I
But
mean, oh,
there's
God.
also downsides to that, but I won't cover those here.
Yeah, I was about to say the gameplay was definitely simplified because I got a couple of people into four on the basis of it's a little bit more simple, and especially with like four answer, it's like you can come on co-op with me and play and it'll be fun, and uh, and they kind of enjoyed it just because it wasn't sort of this crazy thing where, like we were saying before, with the tank controls you have to kind of be
You need
not
four
exactly a
hands.
master with the controls, but it definitely takes a lot longer to learn because I know a lot of people, especially recently, I've tried getting someone onto the older AC games, and I'm honestly used to the oldest experience ever of just using D-pad, and a lot of people instantly are just going to be like, "Oh my God, D-pad! Seriously, you play with that?" And the person that I was trying to teach. I was putting them on the PS2 emulator and Armored Core 2 because I was like, "Oh, you've got to play this. It's great. It's a good starting point." And they tried playing it with D-pad, and they were just like, "Oh God, this is horrible. What's going on?" And I was just like, "Oh God, this is not good."
Now, what about the sort of what do I want to say? The motif, the veneer, the sort of feel of transitioning from third gen to fourth gen, or I guess prior AC games. What was different in fourth?
I'm trying to think because it's not exactly one thing that really contributes to saying, well, okay, this is the thing that definitely makes the definitive experience for fourth gen and for answer and for. But it's the whole mixture of things that we've gone on about, like the simplicity of it, the speed, the mixture of feeling more overpowered. Because in the other games, you'd spend a load of time, building up an AC and trying to make the uh, perfect combo of parts that would make you feel really good. But then there was always that sort of risk of, well, if you mess up once, then you're just going to get wrecked. And not exactly case in point, but to do with the heat thing, um, Nexus has become like a meme in terms of like, oh god, the heat. What they did to the heat in Nexus was insane because you'd just overheat in no time if you didn't run a decent AC, and even then it was a bit awkward, you know. Whereas not having to manage all of that stuff and having it more simplified made for a little bit more accessible to more people, you know, because they're not turned off by this whole idea of, okay, I have to manage my heat levels, I have to check that I've got all these amazing parts. You can kind of just go straight into the game and immediately feel as though you're kind of strong because the starting AC is pretty good at the beginning.
Chang, anything to say? I think we're about ready to wrap up the topic.
Brown and more brown.
Brown and more brown.
That's it.
There you go.
Those are your texture choices.
Yeah, that's the color palette. I like the snowy levels. Those are fun.
See, there's this weird thing that's been happening since 4th gen, where it's kind of tried to emulating a very modern and realistic look to it, which is kind of what I'm referencing when I'm talking about the brown in Armored Core 4 and to some extent in 5 and Verdict Day. But then when you look at gameplay, it's so incredibly unrealistic that it's almost hilarious.
That's pretty rich. All right. I think that's we're close to an hour here. Want to cut it?
All right. This is the point where we normally would have an outro or something.
We'd have an outro. We'd say thank you for listening / watching. Hope to see you next time where our
don't
topics
give a shit,
be...
so no.
Yep, there we go. All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.